It's strange how something once dismissed as trash can turn into treasure. Picture this. The screen flickers in your darkened living room. You're half laughing, half cringing at a green-skinned mutant janitor with a mop. It's grotesque. It's bizarre, and yet you're watching. You can't look away. Behind the blood splatter and the chaos, there's a strange sincerity, a strange kind of justice. And for a moment, you wonder, is this ridiculous monster actually a hero? This isn't another comic book franchise turned billion-dollar empire. This isn't a reboot polished beyond recognition. This is the Toxic Avenger, Toxie, the radioactive underdog born in the sleazy, neon-soaked back alleys of 1980s grindhouse cinema. And, believe it or not, this is the anti-hero our kids might desperately need right now. But to understand why, we need to go back to where it all began, among the smoke of toxic waste, the bullies, the bloodbaths, and the beating. Pulsing heart of a character that should never have worked, yet somehow still stands. The world of cinema was changing. The box office was saturated with clean-cut action stars, teen heartthrobs, and fortune-seeking adventurers. The monster was, mostly, neatly locked away in horror. Heroes were flawless, predictable, and safe. Then came Trauma Entertainment, a small New York-based studio co-founded by two underdogs in their own right, Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Herz. Trauma wasn't polished. It wasn't politically correct. Hell, most of the time, it wasn't even safe to watch on a full stomach. But it had heart. Lloyd Kaufman, the chaotic visionary behind the Toxic Avenger, wasn't trying to make just another low-budget horror parody. Not really. He saw something brewing just beneath the surface, rising anxiety. A creeping corporate apathy. A world so obsessed with image that kindness and courage started looking pathetic, weak, and toxic. He was the answer to that. A misfit mutant who didn't fit into those glossy movie posters. Because that was the point. Melvin Ferd Junko Threa, scrawny, bullied janitor from Tromaville, wasn't supposed to be anyone's hero. He was awkward. He was ridiculed. The world spat on him every day until he fell headfirst into a vat of toxic waste. His flesh melting in agonizing detail, and was reborn as something unbearable to look atbu, somehow impossible to ignore. Imagine the irony. In a world obsessed with looking perfect, the ugliest man becomes the moral compass. A man burned by society literally so he could burn down injustice in return. He didn't swing from rooftops or glide through the skies. No. Toxie galloped through alleys in a tutu and gym shorts, wielding a mop like it was Mjolnir. Saving blind girls, exposing corrupt politicians, avenging puppies, kids, and elderly women too fragile for the world he lived in. He was grotesque. And yet, in his own way, Toxie was beautiful, you see? The Toxic Avenger is so much more than a gory B-movie with bad wigs and worse continuity. It's actually an intensely emotional satire, messy, blood-soaked cry for empathy in a world that discards the invisible. At its core, it's a story about vengeance, yes, but also transformation. Courage, acceptance. The transformation of Melvin into Toxie was horrifying, genuinely hard to watch. His skin bubbled, screams echoed. As grotesque as it was for many marginalized kids, watching in the 80s and 90s, kids who felt like freaks, the scene wasn't monstrous. It was, I don't know, relatable, metaphorical. Necessary because haven't we all been Melvin at some point, lost in a world too cruel to care? A world where the bullies win, the bad guys make the rules, and no one comes to get justice for the little people. So when Toxie rise dripping green, eyes burning with new purpose, it's impossible not to cheer. Not because he's a flawless superhero, but because he's us. Because he fights when no one else will. He is the rage of the disregarded, and he's finally strong enough to be seen. But the brilliance of the Toxic Avenger is that it never pretended to be polished or high art. That's what made it dangerous. Subversive. Parents protested. Critics recoiled. The violence was gratuitous. The gore absurd. Jokes that would never fly today flew effortlessly in the lawless world of Tromaville. But amid the chaos, if you looked close, you'd see something brutally truthful. Real pain. Real injustice. Real fear. And yet, there's a reason this gooey, gutsy misfit turned into a cult icon. He spoke directly to people who'd been forgotten nerds, outcasts, immigrants, punks, queer kids, bullied teens for decades. He told them they didn't have to be pretty to be loved, or popular to be powerful. Toxie was the revenge fantasy we didn't know we needed, but also the morality tale we didn't know we were watching. And that tale didn't stop in the gutters of 1984. Because just a few years later, something truly bizarre happened with a flick of studio magic and a heavy dose of irony. The grotesque, violent R-rated film was transformed into a children's cartoon. Yes, really? The Toxic Crusaders, suddenly, Toxie, was lunchbox material. He now had a catchy theme song, some lovable sidekick freaks, and swapped blood for eco-friendly messaging. The mop was still there, but now it cleaned pollution. Instead of dismembering criminals, Toxie was recycling, teaching kids to stand up to bullies and protecting the environment. And you might think, isn't that just hypocrisy? But it wasn't. It was brilliant. Because if the original Toxic Avenger was a rebellious howl, the Toxic Crusaders was the lullaby whispered into a new generation's ears. No longer a tale only about revenge, it became one of redemption. It normalized difference. It promoted weirdness as strength. It showed that imperfect bodies and unusual voices didn't mean you weren't worthy of love or leadership. In many ways, he became the freak role model the 90s never had enough of. But then he vanished. Like some strange fever dream, Toxie melted away from pop culture. Hollywood grew up, or at least it pretended to. And a new generation of superheroes took center stage, sleek, flawless, and endlessly merchandisable. Toxie didn't fit into that world anymore. He was too weird, too raw, too real. But here's the twist. Here's where it gets wild. In 2023, most 4 decades after his first rampage through Tromaville, the Toxic Avenger came back. Reimagined, rebooted, this time directed by Macon Blair, with Peter Dinklage stepping into Toxie's moldy green shoes. Yes, Tyrion Lannister became Toxie, and if that sounds insane, it is. But also, it's beautiful. Because Peter Dinklage, as an actor who has faced unfair judgments based solely on appearance, constantly typecast and rarely granted leading roles, was the exact right choice. He brought a layer of tragic elegance to the chaos. He was Toxie not just physically, but spiritually. The quiet man pushed to the edge, who chose to rise rather than rage in this new film. It didn't throw away the grotesque roots. It honored them, but it went deeper. It leaned into the metaphor, into the heartache, the vulnerability, underneath the gore and gallons of toxic ooze. It told the same story Melvin's always been telling, and this time, we were ready to listen. We live in a world today where kids grow up watching heroes who are gods, billionaires, invincible warriors. You look up at them and think, not I could be that, but I'll never be enough. That's what makes Toxie different. Toxie wasn't born into greatness. He was thrown into a literal chemical nightmare. He didn't earn justice through wealth or war, but by refusing to disappear. That's what kids need to see now. Not just pretty capes and sparkling teeth, but Avengers who bled real blood, who were laughed at, beaten, bullied, and kept going anyway. Kids need to see that strong doesn't mean flawless. That ugly can still mean beautiful. That you can feel unwanted, unseen, and still wield a mop like it's a sword and shout. Not. Today, music slows, shifts to somber piano, because, let's be honest, the world is more toxic than it's ever been. Social media curates perfection and punishes anything outside it. The bullies are sneakier, now-silent likes, whispered shame, endless comparison. Mental health among teens is collapsing. Vulnerability is mocked more often than valued. Kids feel isolated, invisible, desperate to conform. So when we ask why, bring back the Toxic Avenger today. That's why, not to sell toys, not to cash in on nostalgia, but to remind us and them that you don't have to be perfect to matter. That you don't have to look the part to play the part. That you can still be the freak, the outcast, the kid with a stutter or a limp or a different skin or a messy past, and be everything this world needs. Right now, Toxie was never the hero we deserved. He's the one we never bothered to notice, but now we need him. And the good news? He's back. So here we are, nearly 40 years after a radioactive janitor stumbled out of a chemical disaster and into cult movie history. Back then, Toxie was laughed at, feared, censored, and labeled too disgusting for mainstream audiences. But somehow, he survived, not because he was marketable, not because he was easy to watch, but because under all the slime and deformity, he was honest. Real, human, in a way most heroes could never be. And now, in today's world, with our endless filters, with our curated personas and our shrinking tolerance for imperfection, Toxie's message hits even harder. That being broken doesn't make you worthless. That being different doesn't make you dangerous. In fact, it might make you the very thing the world needs. In the newest film, we saw this idea pushed even further. He's not just taking revenge on goons or punishing cartoonish villains. He's fighting corruption that feels eerily familiar. Greedy corporations, failed healthcare systems, systems built to keep good people small. And he doesn't win because he's smarter or richer or faster. He wins because he refuses to give up on himself and on the people no one else fights for. There's one scene in the new Toxic Avenger Reboot quiet, tender, completely unexpected, that lingers long after the movie ends. He's standing in front of a mirror, half his face melted beyond recognition, body still dripping from whatever chemical mashup is keeping him alive. And he looks at himself not with fear, not with self-hate, but with acceptance. Not, I'm proud of what I look like, but something deeper. This is who I am. And I'm still worthy of love. That's the kind of moment that doesn't just stick to your memory, sticks to your soul. And you know what's wild? In a cinematic universe where everything is now a shared franchise, where origin stories are pumped out like factory meals, no other hero has had a journey quite like Toxie's. He started in the gutter, literally crawled through the lowest of the low-budget filmmaking, got mocked by big studios, turned into a cartoon, then a comic book, then vanished altogether. And now he's risen again. Not glossier, not shinier, but wiser. The new generation might not know every line from the original 1984 film. They might never see the splatter effects or the rubbery gore that made it infamous. But what they can see now is a character who, despite every reason to become a villain, chose something better. Chose kindness. Chose courage. Chose community. That's real power. Wouldn't it be something if that became the new model for superheroes? Not unattainable perfection, but flawed integrity. Compassion forged through suffering. Not super because of a suit or serum, but because they stood up when the world had completely written them off. That's what Toxie has always been. The hero of the invisible. The fighter for the forgotten. And truth be told, even as adults, we need reminders like that. We've all had versions of the toxic barrel we've all fallen in. Whether it was loss, trauma, bullying, heartbreak, depression, rejection, we've all melted a little. You've all had to shape a new identity from the wreckage. And maybe the point of Toxie was never that he got super strength or a deformed face or radioactive powers. Maybe it was that. Despite all of it, he still showed up. Again and again. He didn't run from the pain. He mopped it up, and in doing so, he became something strangely beautiful. Not because he was fixed, but because he kept fighting, so the next time someone scoffs at the Toxic Avenger, calls it trash cinema, calls the character over the top or outdated, remember? There's genius in the grotesque. There's heart in the horror. And there's wisdom in the weird places we're often too proud to look. Toxie may not be the superhero kids hang on their bedroom walls. He may never headline billion-dollar blockbusters or trendy video games. But his story raw, ridiculous. Radioactive eyes, the kind of tale that sticks deep in your bones. Because inside Melvin's mess, there's a message we can't afford to ignore anymore. Maybe the real hero isn't the one who saves the day. Maybe the real hero is the one who never gave up on it in the first place.